Okay, we have a new YouTube link, man. I'm sorry for this, but hopefully this is going to be okay. Roman, can you turn on your video?
This is too much.
1 minute.
Yeah.
I'm just checking if the link is live on YouTube.
Need to check this or that.
Such a neat with them.
What's this? Oops. Any luck?
It's gone to the YouTube page, but I don't see anything being streamed there yet. It's just a blank page.
Okay. Let me see if this one's working.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, we are live. We are live on this new link that I circulated, I think. Okay, you want to turn on your video?
My video is on.
What? No, I don't see you.
I can see you though.
This is so
And
weird.
we're live on YouTube, so I think we should start the conversation.
We can, but again, it still says not yet. I mean, it still asks me to ask you to start video. So I don't even know what's visible right now. This is so bizarre. This has never happened before. Okay, so Romal, I want to start the conversation anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could tell if you're visible, then my life would be much simpler. But on the YouTube stream, I can only see myself. Okay, wait. Maybe now I can see you. At least I can see you here. Okay. Good evening to you. First of all, we are now about 16 minutes late, which is highly unusual. But I mean, I wish at least in front of you we had a modicum of appropriateness, of propriety. But alas, it is not to be. So in any case, this is the 13th/14th episode, because we had an episode 0 of lawyers, artists, and others talk law, love, and equity. This is a series which is sort of inspired by trying to reinvent broadcast media as we know it. We are inspired by love for beauty and love for wisdom. We think there's not enough of that in our day-to-day life. And the media that we consume seems to have no interest or investment in amplifying that in our lives. So there's not enough thoughtfulness and not enough sensitivity, not enough beauty in what we encounter. It's usually anger and pain and mistrust and fear. It really doesn't do enough for the richness of human experience. This is really why we felt compelled to have conversations, at least at a time like this, which are sort of eternal in nature. Conversations we could have had 100 years ago or 100 years into the future, with the hope of trying to live better with ourselves, each other, and nature. So this episode, today evening's episode, is inspired by our Northeastern brothers and sisters. And we thought we would start. I mean, there's so much racism internal to India. And I think, in many ways, India was colonial before it was colonial, right? Like, we were ready to oppress each other. If you go out in the traffic, if you go out in the streets, you can see how nasty we are to people. When there are no rules, you can behave how you want. And that really indicates what your priorities are as a human being. And that for us is sort of reflective of our morals and ethics. And I think we're also very easily xenophobic in some unfortunate ways. Sometimes we're super friendly, or we just not very comfortable living with each other. And the more and more I thought about it, yesterday I was having a conversation with a dear friend, and we were talking about how India just wouldn't be India without our Northeastern friends. In the sense that so much of urban life is constituted by folks from the Northeast, for one, just in large metros, but also it's so different from everything else. It's so beautiful to be able to live in a place with as much diversity as this country, right? And how could we not celebrate that? And I think a lot of it sort of comes from the ignorance that we have about each other, and Romal, I'm so sorry, but like I really have no idea about your culture, your context, nothing whatsoever, And I'm apologizing to you and really anyone like you and others from the Northeast, whether they're from the cities or otherwise, because I mean, we haven't taken the effort to educate ourselves, and so we thought we'd start with an education of ourselves. So over the first hour today, what we'll do is spend some time understanding a few facts and cultural artifacts about the states in the Northeast, starting with what constitutes the Northeast itself, because I, for one, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I'm smiling like an idiot, but that's because I'm an idiot, not because there's an ulterior motive, and also because I suppose I can't cry right now on a live stream, and starting with what the Northeast is and understanding from you and Lalcha and Padmini will join us later as well. What are these things? Can you tell us a few facts about these places? Can you tell us what different tribes there are? Can you tell us about like art forms, and in a way that might be slightly different from an NCERT textbook? Because the NCERT textbook is full of dead knowledge, and it's not really tied to experience. And so we thought we'll start with that. How do you feel about that? Shall we do that?
I think, yeah, that's a good idea. What I'm going to do is, however, I'm going to switch my camera off because I think audio will stream better. You'll still see my face, but I think it'll just be more comfortable because I'm holding this camera in my hand. So,
but Romal,
can I switch my camera off?
See, if you're stuck with just my face, that may not be fair to our viewers, So.
But I'll keep it on, no issues. Okay, I'm going to get into a comfortable position though. That's okay.
Do that.
So when we're talking about the Northeast, I mean, even the poster that we sent out, we call ourselves the Seven Sisters.
Yes.
But, just within the Northeast, we often have this running joke saying that we're seven sisters and one brother, because Sikkim is often left out of the whole discussion when it comes to the Northeast of India. Mm-hmm. The idea that the Northeast is one cohesive place where everyone is, cooperates with each other, it's a beautiful brotherhood or sisterhood or whatever, is something that people like to propagate and make people believe that that's the truth. But in reality, each of those states in the Northeast is a world on its own, and we have a lot of problems between each other. But when we leave the Northeast and we come into what we call mainland India, we kind of band together because there really isn't any other way. So if we're going state by state, I think we start with the tip of Bengal, and we have the state of Sikkim.
So
now,
I have a question, Romal. So we can see there are two ways in which we can run this. One is I can just let you speak, and Lalcha is also here. So I can let the both of you just take us through it as though it's an education. The other idea that I had was maybe to open a map of India and just take a look at what constitutes what, and I'm happy to do it in any case. And
super.
Yeah,
we could open a map and we could totally have that conversation.
Is it okay if I ask you some questions in between?
Absolutely.
For instance, just for now, what you were saying, right? Like I have a friend of mine. He works as a barber, but his name is Asum. He's Mizo, but he grew up in Nagaland, and he told me that languages are not even the same. He said, "I can't understand what the next person is saying." And
yeah, often more than not, you can't understand what the person 2 kilometers away from you is saying in states in the Northeast, because it's such a diverse culture. The amount of people who are packed into each of these states, it's very tough for me to explain. But in Manipur, we have a saying that every 2 kilometers, the language changes. Once you leave the valley area and you go into the hills, every 2 kilometers, the language changes. And we're not talking about dialect change. We're talking about absolute language changes. So yeah, you have the map up there, which is great. Now, if you can see, there's Bangladesh there, and you have Nepal. And between Bangladesh and Nepal, you have this really small tract of land that really connects the Northeast to India. And I think it's very significant and very symbolic that that's literally how little connects the Northeast and India. It's literally just that bit of land. Even when we talk about it culturally, politically, whatever, it's really just that much. Now, why is the Northeast a part of India? When the British Raj existed, a lot of these states were actually part of bigger princely states, except maybe for Assam, which was a presidency. All of these other states were actually parts of other princely states, And the British took keen interest in this area because it was very unique to them. It was very culturally unique. And I think more than anything else, they were just, completely blown away by how exotic this area was. So for a very, very long time, they looked at the Northeast as areas that they needed to protect. There were times where the British actually involved in local politics. There were times where they didn't, and they just let things happen as they wanted to happen. Like, for example, for a very long time, the state of Manipur was a princely state under the C schedule, which means while the British were involved in choosing a leader for the state, they kept out of everything else administratively. And, when we talk about the Northeast today in 2020, we think of it as one cohesive unit, but these were actually bits and pieces that were put together into the map of India almost within a span of 30 years after our independence.
Hey, can I ask you a really dumb question?
Yeah.
So, for instance, let's assume and understand that all of us may have no context whatsoever, right? So you have to really talk to me like I don't have any education in this.
Just ask me the question, Badri. It's okay.
No, I have to I have to protect my ignorance and the ignorance of all of us watching this, And the way to do it is feel comfortable in our ignorance. So I want to ask you, for instance, it's not like Bhutan, Burma, Nepal, where there were clearly different kingdoms, and we know this as a fact. Is it surprising to us that they didn't become part of India?
I'll answer that. Now, both Nepal and Bhutan, while they were very much within the area of what the British considered the Indian Raj or the British Raj or the Indian, whatever they called India at that point of time, Bhutan always maintained its independence, and the British really had very little political interest in Bhutan because if you look at Bhutan, it's a mountainous region. It's not agriculturally very, very productive. It's not necessarily a land that is economically significant. And so therefore the British kind of just let it be. And the kingdom continued to be like that very much into our independence movement. So much so at the time of independence movement, people who are drafting the new borders of India asked Bhutan if they wanted to be a state in India. And Bhutan said they would prefer to be an independent kingdom, and India respected that. And that's exactly why Bhutan continues to be a really small landlocked country. And we're still their big brother, where we're constantly helping them in terms of providing defense and all kinds of things. India continues to do that. Nepal always had a separate identity, I think from the 14th century itself. And Nepalis never really considered themselves a part of India. But here's where the problem happens, because all Nepalis don't live in Nepal. You have ethnic Nepali communities spread all across the Northeast, and it's not like they came from Nepal. The movements happened so long ago that the culture of these communities is very separate from the culture of Nepal as it is today. And so it's really wrong for us to say that all Nepalis belong to Nepal, because they don't. There are significant chunks of Nepali populations in Manipur, in Sikkim, in Assam, in Bengal, West Bengal. So, sorry, Badri?
No, I'm saying in Kalimpong, Darjeeling,
which is the northern parts of Bengal, West Bengal. So when we're looking at,
I have a question. I think part of it might also be geographical, right? It's actually a surprise, and this continues to be sort of contested, right? Amongst some sections of people. See, you can see Nepal was able to manage around the end of the Himalayas. There's a neat geographical border almost between what constitutes India, what constitutes Nepal, and what constitutes China about that. And it sort of runs all the way through, I feel. And which is why I remember there were movements around Sikkim claiming independence for that region. But for India, of course, strategically it's critical because it was the way into getting all of this other land into their ecosystem, which is why, at least historically, it's panned out in such a way as well. Bhutan was able to maintain its cultural independence. We can't say the same of the others here.
If you're looking at it geographically, it's one geographical area. That's, the Himalayas, the lower Himalayas and the foothills. And that runs all the way from Himachal Pradesh into bits of Uttarakhand, the whole of Nepal. Then you've got Sikkim, and then you've got Bhutan, and you've got Arunachal Pradesh, right? It's one, if you look at it, it's that brown, very clear demarcated line.
It's so nice to see it on an atlas. I feel like young person again. But so it ends around Arunachal, is it? Like
Yeah, it ends in Arunachal and enters into North Burma. Now, again, when we're talking about Myanmar, Indians are really, really ill-informed when it comes to Burma. When we talk about Burma, we always think of it as one idea, whereas Burma was also a conglomerate of several kingdoms, even till around the time of independence. Burma actually came together into what we look at the map as Burma today only during the British. And Burma was very much under the British for a very long time. It's just that it wasn't made a part of the Indian, I don't know what they called it, the Indian territory or whatever. So Burma was always kept separate. The reason being, again, because I think the British always looked at Burma as a problematic area. They always knew that this was going to be a place where problems would flare up. They knew that there were a lot of problems between the kingdoms in Burma itself. So Burma, before the British arrived, had been unified only twice. Sometime somewhere in the 13th century, when the capital was in Bagan, which is also spelled Pagan, which is in central Burma next to Mandalay. And then much, much later, when the Mon kingdom down south in Burma united the whole kingdom, and then the capital was shifted to Rangoon, which is why Mandalay and Rangoon are the two big cities.
Right.
But the Burmese per se don't really, what's called Burman identity today is again an identity that has been created like what is considered Indian identity. It's actually, it's a mix of several identities, largely again remnants of this whole Pagan kingdom, which was 14th century, and then bits of the Mon kingdom adding into. There were smaller kingdoms, like India shared a border largely with the Tang, Awa, and the Peng kingdoms, but they hardly feature in any of our, unless you go into Manipur and you look at the language. In Manipur, anything that comes from outside is always given the prefix Awa, because the closest kingdom was Burma. And anything that came from Burma always had the prefix of Awa. So, like for example, we have a specific kind of coriander in Manipur, which is used only for meat dishes. And it doesn't look like coriander at all. It's actually a very spiky leaf. So we call regular coriander Phadigom, but we call this other coriander Awa Phadigom. Similarly, we call cucumber Thabi, but we call watermelon Awa Thabi, because watermelons came in from that kingdom. So language tells you the history about this area and how the Awa kingdom existed for a very long time. We've lost, of course, most of those details to history, but anyway, I'll talk about that when we talk about Manipur. Do I get to talk about Sikkim now, or do you have any questions?
No, I just wanted to make one observation. And hi, Lalcha. Lalcha is here. It's good to see him. He's not muted. Lalcha, say something so we know you're around and audible, please. Okay, we heard a car horn, which is evidently not from you. Can't hear you, buddy. Okay, this is not a problem. Lalcha, you figure it out. Say hi whenever you can say hi. Romal, I wanted to just say, this is, I mean, like coming back to that previous point on geography, right? I was also looking at Burma. It clearly looks like it was not implied by geography in the way that, say, some parts of these countries are. So when you say that Burma has this federal structure which was sort of stitched together within it, this is news to me. I didn't know this as a fact. So it's so interesting because, like, look at this. This is clearly not a natural demarcation. This is
absolutely not. The southern parts of Burma, which kind of share that peninsula with Thailand, and mostly with Thailand and Malaysia, that was actually remnants of the Mon kingdom, and the Mon were people who ruled that whole area, that peninsula, right. And today, what we call Burmese culture, we just use the term Burmese, is actually a mixture of these two cultures, the Pagans and the Mons, because they were the two big kingdoms that kind of brought together the whole idea of a Burmese empire. Before that, there was no concept of a Burmese empire. And it's only when they kind of created the idea of this one Burman identity that the kingdom came into place. And then, of course, they became militarily very strong and they conquered Thailand several times. They went all the way up to Cambodia. Surprisingly, they never tried attacking a lot of India except the state of Manipur again, because Manipur has always been a very fertile state, especially the Central Valley where the Meitei people live. It's one of the only places in the world where you can get 3 cycles of rice in 1 year. Wow. Because it's basically an old lake that filled up. And so the whole, the soil is loamy. It's just clay. You don't find red soil anywhere in Manipur except in the hills. the whole valley is basically a remnant of a lake.
Okay.
So
Now you're going
the-
to so you need to tell us about each of these states one by one. You want to
yeah,
start?
so let's go state by state. Yeah.
Let's go
We'll
stick-
start with Sikkim. Now, Sikkim is actually the last state to be added into India because, well, Goa got statehood much later, but Sikkim was added into the country only mid-70s. Till then, Sikkim had its own Raja. It had its own king. And at some point of time, the king asked to be added into India. So it's the only state that requested to become part of the Indian Union after independence. So for a very long time, Sikkim continued to be a separate state. It continued to be a separate kingdom. And which is why even today in Sikkim, the Raja and Rani are venerated quite a bit. And yeah, while they don't have any privy like the rest of India, the royalty across India, they are still venerated by their own local people. So Sikkim is there stuck in between the Himalayas. It's north of West Bengal, and it's jam-packed between Nepal on one side and Bhutan on one side. And so therefore, Sikkim has people from Nepal and from Bhutan, and of course the natives of Sikkim itself. It's a lot like the rest of the Northeast, but it does have a slight, inclination more towards what we'd call Darjeeling culture, which is northwest, the northern parts of West Bengal, which received a lot of education, were holidays for the British, was a holidaying zone for the British, hill station kind of culture. So it's a lot, it's very Western looking in that sense. But I think there's a revival in Sikkim today for where a lot of the young people in Sikkim are trying to go back to their original roots, and you have a lot of folk artists. And I'm very excited about what's happening in Sikkim right now because the music coming out of there, the films coming out of there, it's just amazing, right? Sikkim shares a problematic border with West Bengal, and of course it doesn't touch Assam, but close by is another problematic area in Assam. So before I shift to Assam, the big problem in Sikkim right now is the lower districts, the southern districts, and the northern districts of West Bengal have a huge population of Nepalis, specifically the Gorkha community. And so there's been a consistent request for Gorkha land, which is a self-defined Nepali state within India. So we might just see it happen in the next few years because the movement has been rising for quite some time. And there's a clear demarcation within Sikkim about being Nepali and non-Nepali. So at some point of time, I think a few districts from Sikkim and maybe the two northern districts of West Bengal might form a new state, Gorkhaland, or it will become an autonomous area. So that's what happens in West Bengal and Sikkim. It's a nice mixture of cultures. You've got the Nepalis, you've got the Bhutanese, you've got the Bhutias, you've got all kinds of people who live together, the Lepchas. Huge populations. There are quite a few smaller tribes also in Sikkim, but there's very little information that we have about them. Again, being rough terrain, being the northern parts of Sikkim are still very, very inaccessible, like the northern parts of Bhutan. And Sikkim is often the state that faces the most Chinese aggression, like Himachal Pradesh and the Ladakhi area in the north of India, and Arunachal Pradesh on the east. So that's Sikkim. Do you need any more information about Sikkim, or shall we move on?
Hey, Sumal, first of all, you're not an information machine, man. Like, if we can get that on Wikipedia, then what's the point of having you here?
But this is information that I don't think you will get on Wikipedia because so little is written about the Northeast. So.
Really so true. But, I was just thinking when you made this point about Chinese aggression on Sikkim and Himachal, see, but for both India and Nepal, India and China, Nepal and Bhutan are very significant, right? They're sort of buffers in between. So it's very important for China and India to both be nice towards Nepal and Bhutan. And we've seen the effects of that geopolitical conflict play out over several decades now. And Sikkim, on the other hand, is sort of unguarded Indian territory. So if you want to wage a conflict, this is a good place to do it. And similarly, if you're going to go towards Himachal, you have the same kind of advantage because I'm guessing it's kind of clear that Jammu and Kashmir is also open. So somewhere here would be a nice place to attack, and that's what we've seen now. And it's not surprising at all that Sikkim is under as much as this one. So actually, can you tell us? It's nearly 7:40, so I won't. We'll try to. I'll try not to interrupt you too much. But can you tell us what were the circumstances under which the king and queen of Sikkim decided to join India? It would have made much more sense if they were king and queen. What did this have to do with the invasion into Tibet? Did it become clear that Sikkim by itself would not be able to? I mean, did they feel culturally threatened? Did they feel culturally more close to India and the other northeastern states, or do you think there was something else happening?
We know very little about exactly what happened in the late 60s and early 70s in Sikkim, because as I said, this was still it was still a kingdom that was under a king, a dynasty. And while they were very friendly and cordial towards India, a lot of us didn't know what was really happening within Sikkim, right? What we do know that there was a movement towards democracy in Sikkim at some point of time, which was surprisingly led by the ruling power, which is Sikkim has many anomalies that way. You had a king who said, should we become a democratic state? And in the process of initiating democracy within Sikkim, he also did this huge poll asking, do you want to remain an independent state or become a part of India? And apparently, there was an outright decision to become a part of India. And so that's how Sikkim became a part of India. Of course, that's the version of history that we get. And
the enlightenment of the kings of Sikkim is not unique to Sikkim, right? Because we also see that in Bhutan and in a limited way with Myanmar, it's had its own problems subsequently. But the Bhutanese king and queen was fundamental in bringing about a constitutional framework to their existence, and
True.
that in a certain way it recognized their the veneration associated with it, but also created a primacy around Buddhism as an organizing principle of life in that thing. And because Bhutan is more homogeneous than Myanmar, it hasn't had the same kind of ethnic.
No, also you have to realize it's two different kinds of Hinduism altogether. Bhutan follows Mahayana, whereas Burma is completely Theravada. And the kind of Buddhism you follow also makes a huge difference.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And, we won't talk about that, but I just wanted to say that kings in this area were pretty evolved in their imagination. So we do see that they were seeking self-determination and political authority outside of like authority by birth, which I think is very wonderful. I mean, like you talk about the wisdom of kings, and in my mind, at least, it's been this historically inaccurate idea. At least within the Indian subcontinent, outside of the Northeast, we don't think about like the rulers of, say, the last 200 years, right, as being evolved. In the last 100 years, right now, they seem like rent seekers, and that's the imagination of it. Even though there are several very liberated kings and queens and princes and royalty generally, so that it's nice to see a version of it which was wise and well regarded.
So when you look at the Northeast, the royalties were few and far. You had Sikkim, you had 3 royalties within Assam, you had 1 royalty in Manipur, and you had Tripura, and that was it. The rest of the areas didn't come under kingdoms per se, and were largely led by chieftains or tribes or whatever like that. So anyway, moving on to Assam. Assam was for a long time the whole of Northeast India, like the British called the whole area Assam. Almost all the states other than Tripura were carved out of Assam at some point of time. So Assam was the mother state in many, many ways. But Assam, largely modern Assam, when you look at it looks like, you can see it coming out from the mainland and then splitting into 2 parts. One going up north, which follows the border of Arunachal Pradesh, and one going down south following the Barak River with the borders in between Meghalaya, Nagaland, Manipur, and then touching Mizoram and Tripura. So you see it, so you see Assam basically being this 3-pronged kind of a state right in between everything else. The reason being, as I said, because most of the other states were carved out of it, but also because Assam is largely around 2 big rivers. There's the Brahmaputra Valley and the Barak Valley. Okay. So the Brahmaputra Valley comes in from Arunachal and then gets into Bangladesh. And then you have the Barak Valley, which is a tributary of the Brahmaputra, starts in the hills of Manipur and Mizoram and then kind of flows right into the Brahmaputra. The Barak actually has 2. I don't know if you can see Barak very clearly, but that area is called the Barak Valley around Silchar, Kachar. That's called the Barak Valley. It's not a very big river, but it's kind of important to the area. So Assam can be divided into 3 huge parts. You've got the Kamrup area, you've got the Ahom Kingdom in the north, and you've got the Kachar area, which is the part in between Meghalaya, Manipur, Nagaland, and Mizoram, and Tripura. So the Kamrup Kingdom is closest to what Indians know about Assam. The area of Guwahati, of Dispur, all of those areas, your Kamakhya temple. It's very close to what would be considered ethnically Bengali culture, but then of course it's ethnically Assamese. And it's very close to what we would consider mainland culture in the northeast of India, right? But then you've got the Ahom Kingdom, which is the remaining part of the valley that pushes up north into Arunachal Pradesh. And that's really where Assam gets its identity from. So the people were called Ahom. The state technically now is renamed as Ahom. And the people who ruled it were this Thai people. Thai is a much older group of people. You find them all across from Cambodia to India, including the Thais in Thailand and some tribes in Burma also. So the Thai group of languages and the Thai people come from that part, Indochina. And you see the Thais coming into Assam, in the ancient past. And they build their kingdoms in the northern part of the valley. And that's why you have all these big cities there, your Dibrugarh, your Tinsukia, your Sibsagar, all of these big cities that they built and were their capitals. And a lot of what we identify as Assamese culture today, Ahomia culture, is the culture of the Ahoms. Of course, mixed with also the culture of Kamrup, which is towards the west. And then you've got the Kachar, you've got the Kachar area or the Barak Valley, which kind of, as I said, juts into the southern part towards Sylhet in Bangladesh. Kachar is very interesting because Kachar even today has a majority of Bengalis, even though it's within Ahom. And these Bengalis are not necessarily your West Bengalis or East Bengalis, but a different kind of Bengali called Kachari Bengali. And a huge community within the Kachari Bengali is also who we call the Bishnupriya Manipuris, who are a bunch of people who lived in Manipur till around the 19th century and then were kicked out of the state. Not necessarily kicked out, but it was an unfavorable situation and so many of them left. So you've got that Kachar belt, which is this nice mixture of non-majority Bengali groups.
You're right.
And interspersed with a lot of tribes, and the tribes belonging to different ethnic identities. And that becomes a large community that lives in the southern part of Assam. Yeah.
Right. So this part of Assam is still warmish. Like I went to Guwahati some years ago and I was very surprised at how hot it was. I was very surprised at how humid
it's very tropical climate. Yeah, so it gets terrible monsoons. It's wet throughout the whole year. And there are interspersed hills in between. If you can notice, if you look at the coloring around Meghalaya, you see that coloring continuing into some bits of Assam.
Right.
So there are hills also in that part. Yeah. So Meghalaya has a clear demand, and your area, the higher elevation, which is the state of Meghalaya. And those hills continue down into the Kachar Valley and then up north. And so there are hilly areas in this. Anglong, and Assam has recognized the tribes that live there and given them their autonomy. So Assam has a few autonomous regions, including the Karbi Anglong area. It also has Bodoland, which you've heard about, which skims the border of Bhutan and is in between the Brahmaputra Valley and Bhutan. It's like one thin stretch. And the Bodos are a very proud community who are similar to Assamese, but are different in their own right. They have their own language. I think because of years of living together with mainstream Assamese, there's similarities too, but language-wise and culture-wise, they are as diverse as they can get. There are many, many communities in Assam, many do a 2-hour session just to talk about that. Let's not get into that, but you can assume that Assam is home to recognized majority communities, 30 plus. And Manipur also live in Assam because tribes don't necessarily follow straight borders. So they live also in Assam and they belong to the Assamese population. South of Assam is Meghalaya. Meghalaya is largely divided into the Garo, Khasi, and Jaintia hills, and the hills are named after the three communities: the Garo and the Khasi, who are very similar to each other. The Jaintia and the Khasi, who are very similar to each other, and the Garos. They are, if you look at them, the Jaintias and the Khasis belong to one ethnic group, but differentiate among themselves minutely. Whereas the Garos are actually very, very different and are probably related to people from central India. But they very much have their space in the northeast right now. And these three communities largely make up the state of Meghalaya. It's one of the most mountainous states in India. It hardly has any plains except the bits that there's a district called Ribhoi that is bordering with Assam, and Ribhoi has some plain areas. And as you can see there, when you look at the state map, there are some parts that are plains, but 90% is hills.
Near the Brahmaputra Valley, for instance, is somewhere.
Yeah, those smaller, lighter brown bits are basically the areas that are plains. Now, Meghalaya, for a very long time, didn't have a clear demarcated border with Assam, and it's hardly been 10 years that the Indian government has actually clearly demarcated what is Meghalaya and what is Assam. Same thing on the border with Bangladesh. Meghalaya and Bangladesh had huge border issues. There were enclaves and then enclaves within enclaves and enclaves within that enclave, and it was just mental. And also with Assam. So that bit of Bangladesh that juts up into Assam, that right next to Meghalaya, to the left of Meghalaya, is for a very long time was one of the most complicated maps on earth. And it's only around 2 years ago that the Indian government and the Bangladesh government just decided, okay, bits of Bangladesh that are in India are India, and bits of India that are in Bangladesh are Bangladesh. And they solved the problem finally. But it was crazy because you can, if you look at old political maps, say 3 years ago, there are some really complicated ones where you've got an enclave, and then you've got an enclave within that, and you've got an enclave within that. So it's basically India within Bangladesh, within India. And it made no sense. The armies hated it, but that's just how the border was drawn. Meghalaya is one of the most beautiful states in the northeast. It's got this lovely temperate tropical kind of mix of climate. So the hills are not very high, so it doesn't get crazily cold like some other parts of the northeast, but it does pretty much get cold. And the parts that face, so you can divide Meghalaya like into two halves: the bits that face Assam and the bits that face Bangladesh. And the bits that face Bangladesh are really tropical; they're hot. And then the bits that face Assam are slightly more temperate. And then you've got the hills right on top, including places like Shillong and all of that, which are cold almost throughout the year. And winters can get really, really chill. Beautiful, beautiful state. People who are very, very in tune with nature. One of the few places in India that still has sacred groves where they make, amazingly strong bridges out of the roots of trees, living trees. And it's just spectacular as a city. I mean, as a state, when it comes to beauty and how well they are connected with the land and the people, and that relationship is so strong. It's also one of the few remaining matriarchal cultures, matrilineal cultures in India, the Khasis and the Jaintias. So it makes for a really interesting visit, and it's a very interesting state. And the identity politics of the state is still being built. So there are a lot of movements for a lot of self-recognition and self-pride. But yeah, that's Meghalaya. Then if you move to the east, you've got Nagaland. Now, a lot of people think if you're from Nagaland, you're Naga, and that's it. It ends right there. But it's a state that is made up of 50 to 60 tribes who identify as Naga. This Naga term is very arbitrary because it was a term that was just randomly given to a bunch of tribes who seemed linguistically similar by the British. But more research that we do kind of makes us realize that that's not true. So within the Naga speaking communities, I mean the Naga languages itself, there are some that are Sino-Tibetan, there are some that are Tibeto-Burman, there are some that are haven't yet been defined. So much so there's one group of Naga languages that originates further south in Manipur, and linguists are now trying to give that bunch of languages a whole new family tree. And so it's called the Tangkhulik group of languages, because there are so many languages that come under that, and it's technically not Tibeto-Burman or Sino-Tibetan. and
Hmm.
so it was wrongly classified. So Nagaland is also a state that decided to have a lingua franca, and so Nagamese as a language is very far away from most of the languages spoken by each of these individual tribes. Nagamese is actually closer to Assamese and has a lot of loan words from Hindi and things like that. But it's the language that keeps the state together, and so the tribes, even if they are not technically intelligible to each other, can use Nagamese to speak with each other, right? Then you've got Manipur. So after you cross Sikkim and you cross Assam, the only old royal kingdom was in the valley of Manipur. And it's a kingdom that goes back, we have written records almost till 1st AD of this kingdom existing. But yeah, it's really, really old. And that's why there's a huge anger within the Meitei community who live in the center of the valley area of Manipur, because it's not recognized by, as we were saying, by the NCERT textbooks. They never talk about this old kingdom, even though it's probably the only kingdom that has written proof of the existing of this dynasty for such a long time. It's a very, very old state. It's had different names at different points of times. There are many historical names. One of the terms that the locals now want to use to define the state is called Kangleipak, which simply translates into dry land. Because that's where the story comes from, that there was a lake in the center which then dried up and became land. And that's the home of the Meiteis. So you can broadly divide the state into three parts. You've got the valley, which is the home of the Meiteis and a few other tribes. Then you've got the northern districts of Ukhrul, Senapati, and Tamenglong, which are largely Naga dominated. And then you've got the southern districts of Churchandpur and Chandel, which are largely Kuki-Chin dominated. The Kuki-Chin people call states like Mizoram home, states like Manipur home, and they're huge in Burma also. So much of the majority of Chin people don't live in India, they live in Burma. They are one of the bigger tribes in Burma. And in Burma also, since there's very little information, the Burmese government is not really interested in, figuring out about the tribes that live in their own country. I'm sure if someone went into the Chin Hills, which, just a second. Yeah, so you've got Manipur. If you look at the Manipur map, you see below Manipur, between Manipur and Mizoram, you see that there's a line drawn just randomly cutting across, but you see that geography continuing down from Manipur down into Burma. If you zoom out, you'll see the hills going right down into Burma, right? Almost to the coast. Now, a large part of that hill tract is called the Chin Hills. And it's largely occupied by people who belong to the Kuki-Chin tribes, right? Now, because the same community lives in Manipur, each of the individual tribes is very proud of their own identity. And together in Manipur, there might be close to 60 plus tribes. But because unlike Nagaland and Mizoram, where there is a movement towards one cohesive identity, in Manipur, each of these tribes continue to have their own individual identities. And so they don't necessarily group up as Naga tribes or Kuki tribes or whatever. There is an idea of these are Naga related and Kuki related, but otherwise each of them have their own strong identity. The same community across the border in Mizoram, however, will not show that identity. Like, for example, if you look at the district of Churchandpur in Manipur, which is the southeast of Manipur, you'll see a community like the Raltes and the Paites, who have their own huge cultural groups existing within, and they're very proud of them. But if you go into Mizoram, the same Ralte and Paite are very happy to call themselves just Mizo. They're fine calling themselves Mizo, and they identify under this idea of Mizo. So in Mizoram also, there's been a movement to get all of these people to identify as one. But there are groups within Mizoram also, like, for example, there's the Chakma, who are people who belong to the Sylheti Plains in Bangladesh, but also live in Mizoram. And they become one of the biggest minorities in Mizoram. So then you move down south to Mizoram. Mizoram is largely occupied by the Mizo Chin Kuki tribes. There has been a movement to kind of identify them all as one today. Sorry?
No. Lalcha's audio was acting up. I just muted him for a minute. Yeah, go on.
Okay, then you've got Tripura on the left. Tripura is used to be a royal kingdom. It was ruled by a royalty for a very, very long time, an ethno-Bengali royalty, but who identify as Tripuri, and they have other identifications. So Tripura has this one dominant ethnic Bengali community that doesn't identify as Bengali anymore, but calls themselves Tripuri or Tipewa or whatever. And then you've got a lot of other tribals who live around them. It was a proper kingdom for a very, very long time. I think there's history dating back till almost the 10th century, where you actually have records of the kingdom. So then that's this part. And then you go up to the north, Arunachal. Arunachal is actually the hugest state in the northeast. It's as big as Assam. I think might be bigger also. And Arunachal has, again, close to 40 plus communities. And is slightly different from the rest of northeast because Arunachal also has Ladakhi communities, Bhutanese related communities, Naga related communities, and then a whole bunch of people that just can't be classified in any way. What differentiates Arunachal so much from the rest of the Northeast is largely Buddhist, while Nagaland is animist and Christian. Mizoram is almost completely Christian. Manipur is largely Christian, animist, and Hindu. The Khasis are largely Hindu. So religion-wise also, you see a big difference between Arunachal and the rest of the Northeast. So yeah, that's me putting it just in gist. I mean, I could go on and on about each state for hours and hours, but that's just to give you an idea of how the Northeast is divided.
This is such a great geography lesson. I'm so grateful to you for giving me this because, I mean, I'm saying me, but I suppose there's almost a selfish interest to educate us in context, So that is really amazing, Romal, and thank you so much for introducing us to this all over again. It's so easy to forget that people have their own histories, right? And when you were speaking about the the kingdoms and the tribes which preceded India, it's so easy to forget that these are ancient. They're much older than the idea of India.
Absolutely.
And I mean, India as we know it right now, India as we know was federally constituted, arranged. Geographically, we know it made sense in a certain way because people talk about the peninsula as, I mean, so much of geopolitics now makes sense looking at a map. But I haven't experienced this from first principles. So this is really wonderful. And, it's now when I'm zooming it out and we've been talking about the Northeast, right? I'm seeing for the first time how large the piece is. It's not an insignificant push.
Absolutely not.
When it really bugs me to think about the injustice of this almost a little bit, because not almost, of course, the injustice of it, because it's a tragedy that we don't see more Northeastern entrepreneurs or Northeastern scholars in the mainstream. There's just, I mean, the only encounter we have with Northeast, at least in metros, is as service staff, right? And working on jobs that you don't expect. And the three of you here today, hi Padmini, it's nice to see you.
Hi Romal.
Hello, hi Padmini.
So long.
Lalcha,
Hi Lalcha.
Lalcha, can you please start your video? I think he is struggling a little bit to join. But he will be with us shortly, hopefully. Let's say a prayer in any case. But, and that's really the beginning of the second part of this conversation. Hi, Lalcha. Nice to see you in the San Francisco of India, Bangalore. But in any case, I just wanted to say this is a good segue into the second part of the conversation because we're talking about the Northeastern experience in metros, right? Because of now when we see the geography, it makes sense that it's not economically rich because that requires coordination. When you have terrain like that, what kind of coordination can you expect? You said languages change within 2 kilometers. That makes sense because we say that cuisines change frequently, right? I don't know if we say 100 meters or 100 kilometers, but it could be both within India itself. So when you say languages itself change within 2 kilometers, that's because each tribe or each setting is so isolated from the next one. The terrain is such that you are so self-contained that you don't really have a larger imagination of it, right? So that makes sense. That makes economic activity without coordination. If you can't make sense of the factors and circumstances of production, then it's very difficult to be able to organize for your thriving. So that so many people have had to migrate out and find economic value elsewhere is the reality that makes sense, but it's also a tragedy because we clearly aren't doing enough with individual communities within each of these places. So for our friends who are joining us right now, welcome to the 12th/13th episode of Lawyers, Artists, and Others Talk Law, Love, and Equity. If you haven't, please subscribe to our channel. You'll find some wonderful gems here. One day it's a geography lesson, another day it's a meditation class, and another day it's a raga exploration session. All of them are quite interesting, but this is between 7 to 8. And 8 to 9:30, we try to have conversations which are inspired by love for wisdom, and they're sort of eternal in manifestation. This has been made possible by a bunch of organizations coming together. We'll talk about them a little further, but one of the reasons why we felt the need to invent this kind of broadcast media, a lot of people said your webinars, and I was like, no, man, we are the anti-webinar in every way you can imagine. Webinars are a pain in the bum, and for every acceptable reason. But we want to replace what we know of as news media, as the kind of media that we consume. Have conversations which are slow, thoughtful, considered, deliberate, and in every way far more civil than most other conversations that our society sees, very unfortunately. And so today's conversation is about the Northeastern experience in India. The first hour was Romal giving us an exceptional history lesson. A history and geography lesson. I wish I learned history and geography this way in school. We were actually quite lucky to have some wonderful teachers in our time. So, and I'm still this ignorant. So I'm just saying that, putting it in perspective, it's really must be quite bad for most people who haven't encountered this, but have deeply settled ideas of how we should treat our Northeastern brothers and sisters. This is really a tragedy. So this is also a series of fundraisers, as you know. We've invented this because we think there's no public media in India. We have a government channel, but government channels and public media are not quite the same thing. Most of the media that we have in our society is controlled by interests we don't see. At least if they were visible, there's a beginning and the possibility of having a conversation. But given the way it is, it's not quite right, and we need to have more conversations which are more public. So, and given the fact that it costs nothing for us to buy a Zoom Pro account and put it on YouTube, there's no reason why we shouldn't try to create a transaction here, which is not enabled by advertising, but the power of everyday kindness, right? So we're raising money right now in the context of COVID relief for three basic causes: social security for migrant workers, food security for the urban poor, and the third is protective gear for essential care workers. And that includes your kirana shop owners, barber shop owners, whoever, all the strangers who make your life possible, right? Because they're the ones on the front line of this. Our survival has been enabled by a bunch of people who we until now haven't begun to acknowledge. And funnily enough, that's a nice parallel to the Northeastern story as well. So now we can sort of begin the second part of our conversation. Nice to see you, Lalcha, and nice shirt that you've got there. Can you hear us, see us? Can you speak?
I hope I'm audible now.
You are, yes. I'm so happy to see you.
So it's switched to my phone.
Okay, good. I think
Yeah.
I hope we don't have further problems as we go along. Padmini is also in here. Padmini has made this exercise possible, so she knows everything about what's happening in the background. So the first question that I have to ask all of you is a matter of introductions, right? We're going to spend the rest of our time talking about what you do and where you're coming from, so on and so forth. So please introduce yourself without talking about what you do or where you come from. And so talk about your dreams, your aspirations, your favorite food, whatever you like, but please just don't talk about your work for a few minutes, and then we'll move into something possibly more shallow, depending on the situation. So Padmini, you've had the time to prepare for this question multiple times in your life, so we'll start with you. You're not allowed to repeat your answers. There might be fans of yours who've seen all your appearances on these episodes. So we need a new answer from you, Padmini, and then we'll go to Romal and Lalcha as well.
Fans, it seems. Hi, Badri. Hi, Romal. Hi, Lalcha. It's really great to see both of you after so long. And Badri, after 2 days. It's a delight. Always. I'm Padmini, and my latest thing I would like to share about myself is that I've lately been reading a lot of radical literature. and a lot of intersectional literature around how to be a good activist, because given the circumstances,
Literature, is it like roads and crossroads and all of that?
it's the sort of literature that examines various layers of identities in terms of rights and duties and obligations and the politics of where you stand. So the book I'm reading right now is called Unapologetic, and it's by Charlene Carruthers, and it's about her sort of experience as a Black queer feminist activist and how the crossroads of all of those identities influence your politics. So as somebody who's from the Northeast and doesn't identify with either gender and is also queer, and a ton of other identities that come into play, I found that to be very valuable in terms of going forward. So that's my light reading at the moment, and I'm excited to see where this conversation goes.
Yeah, your light reading is rather serious. I have to say that. But in any case, thanks for illuminating that, because it's so easy to forget that the point of intersectionality is basically that there are disadvantages and advantages that you have based on different aspects of your identity, right? So at the same time, you can face an advantage because of one thing and a disadvantage because of another thing. And we haven't yet understood philosophically what the interplay between all of these advantages and disadvantages are. So it's nice for you to bring that up, because this question is about the richness of your life. So to ask that question on the richness of your identity is a nice place to sort of begin this conversation. Mr. Lalcha, a very good evening to you. How would you introduce yourself without talking about what you do or where you're from?
Hey, I'm Lalcha Haukip from Manipur. I'm right now in Bangalore. Recently, I've also been reading, just like what Padmani said, I think we're on the same line, because as Northeasterners, when you try to talk about or read something about race and intersectionality, you often skip to American history and for feminist thing, you go to the feminist movement. For race, you go to the civil rights movement. I actually just finished the biography of Thurgood Marshall, who is the first Black Supreme Court judge. And I'm just trying to, with COVID-19 and things that are going about race and identity, I'm just trying to dig something about, racial issues inspired from the American civil rights movement. So that's what I'm doing right now. And I am not very prepared for this conversation, but it depends on what the question is asked about. Badri told me that you don't have to prepare for this. I'm like, I've come plain and raw for this conversation. So thank you for inviting me.
Hey, we like our vegetables and our lalcha raw. So that's good, lalcha. So don't worry about it. We're very happy to have you here. Thanks for making that parallel with the with other movements. We've also seen, Padmini and I have been speaking about parallels, not always accurate parallels, between Black and Dalit movements as well. And you're speaking about it from this identity context. I think we should all learn from each other. There's no reason not to look at other movements to get a sense of why and how things play out. So thanks for bringing that to light. Mr. Romal, how are you this evening? Could you please introduce?
I'm not going to put my video on because the network is really bad at home. So to keep the audio going, I'm just going to keep it off for a bit. I like that you asked me to not talk about the work that I do, because that's usually what everyone wants to know. I think when I talk about the richness of my identity, something that makes most people laugh is that I didn't know I was Northeastern until I was 15 years old. I grew up in Tamil Nadu. I'm born to mixed parents. My mom is a Tamil Malayali and my dad's partly Manipuri, partly Kachari, all kinds of things. So he's himself a conglomeration from all across the Northeast. And I grew up in a place called Kotagiri, which is next to Ooty in Tamil Nadu. And I grew up in a tribal dominated area. The only difference being that these were Tamil tribes. And so for a very long time, identity didn't really matter to me. I grew up in a caste-free society in the middle of mainland India, which is almost impossible for people to imagine. But I remember nobody even asking me what my caste or community was for a very, very long time. People were just happily knowing that my name was Romal. But I'm happy that I made a discovery about who I was, or at least what a huge part of me was when I was 15, and prompted me into the right direction, because I suddenly discovered that there was this whole new side to me that I had no clue about. And they often say this, right? Like when you're born into a society or a culture, you take everything for granted. But when you suddenly realize that you're not part of that culture and you still belong to it, you go at it with the kind of effort like nobody else has seen before. So for me, it became the purpose of my life after the age of 15 to identify what being Tamil meant, what being Malayali meant, what being Manipuri meant, what being Meitei meant, what all of these identities meant. Because I kind of realized that who I was largely going to be defined by all of these things. And so I went with it with, almost like a manic pursuance, reading up as much history as I could, looking at the kind of literature that was available, picking up as much of the arts that I could, pushed myself into dance, into music, into all kinds of things to kind of understand what this culture was all about. And I did this simultaneously, also discovering my Tamil side, also discovering my Manipuri side. And I use the word Manipuri when technically I should be using the word Meitei. We can talk about that later, about how these micro identities kind of define who we are. So a lot of my life has been about that, about engaging with these communities, trying to figure out what really defines each of these communities and what do they mean in this larger idea of global identity today. What roles could they possibly play? So I think that's what defines me. I'm equally proudly a Tamil person, a Malayali person, a Meitei, and when anyone asks me what do you identify as, the fact that I don't say that I'm Indian immediately irritates a lot of people, but I often tell them I am Tamil, Malayali, Manipuri, and that makes me an Indian. Because it's not the Indian identity that comes first. India is made up by these identities. And for someone like me, I think it's important to go back to that. For 70 years, we've been pushing all these identities under, the carpet, saying, no, the Indian identity is so important. But the Indian identity is made up of these identities. And it's important for us to push this forward. Because today, when you say I'm an Indian, the images that come to your head are what? Diwali, Bhangra, Hindi speaking, going to a temple,
Holi.
blah, blah, blah. And I come from a reality where none of these things belong to what my Indian is, right? And so it's important for us to occupy these spaces and say, Indian is not just this is also Indian. And the way to bring about that idea is to then showcase these different Indians and then say that there's not just one Indian. Like, I don't want 10 years from now someone saying, oh, you're from India, do you speak Hindi? I don't want them to even make that assumption. Because that assumption is so insulting to someone like me coming from the Northeast and the South of India. And so I think that's what defines my identity. This need to explain what the Indian dream was, why India exists as a country, and why we came together as a union. Because somehow I feel like in the last 70 years, we've forgotten that. We've forgotten that we're a union of states. And we are not one nationalistic identity that we're trying to build and propagate as this is what being Indian is.
Yeah, it's we shouldn't Romal, I'm so sorry, man, but like it would be nice if you could try to turn on your video for a bit, because it looks a bit disembodied on the stream. The three of us are just nodding our heads to you, and it might be confusing to someone who's tuning in. So in any case, like if there is a problem though, we'll swap out. There's no issues, right? I
found it so interesting because Romal, I'm also half South Indian. My mother is Telugu and my dad is Assamese. But my mother grew up in Assam, so somehow the Assamese side of my identity just got reinforced. And that's also an interesting discussion. We'll come back to that. I found your point very interesting.
In fact, Padmini, that is exactly what I was about to say, which is...
This is such an ironic thing because all of us here have something to do with South India. I don't know whether, Badri, you picked this out or like it's coincidence.
No, I mean, I grew up here. You guys are my friends. So, I mean, Romal, I happened to encounter him during lockdown. This is the first time we're speaking. So,
okay.
So I suppose it's just a matter of how... and Padmini will tell you this has actually been a point of confusion for us because we're not sure whether we're always highlighting the conversation accessible affairs representative all the time in everything that we do. Diversity is not something just as a matter of celebration because that makes it an exceptional thing. But
your audio is going on and off, Badri.
Okay, thanks for the heads up. I will keep an eye out on that. If necessary, I'll just point it out to me if you if you can. So Roman, I want to pick up on the last point that you made. Because we are a union of states, not states in a union. So the idea of India is a consequence of the richness of our lives. And it is also consistent with an idea of India, but we need to understand what comes from where. It's very easy to get lost in a version of nationalism which preaches like one very small type of meaning of what it means to be Indian, which is blind to the richness of our lives. So thanks for making that point. And Padmini, thanks for making that point of your heritage here as well. And we're going to speak about Rajnikant as well a little later because that's Lalcha's favorite being in the universe, possibly. So, okay, thank you for that introduction. And let's just go around. I want to ask you all one more question now, which is, so like all of you have not only been alive just within your state, right? A lot of you have come to life outside of where you grew up. And so I want to ask you all, in a certain way, you're also privileged within your community, right? Like most people don't even make it this far, and the ones who make it this far are not here. And we will have more diverse audience, more diverse participants over time. It would be nice to hear about the wisdom of Asung, as I was saying earlier, because at Barber, he told me very ruefully a couple of days ago that he has only 2 friends in Bangalore. It was very upsetting. The idea that you can't have friendships outside of your city after being in a new city for 2-3 years, even that's a privilege. I'm no one to speak of your circumstances because it's been much easier for me being from here, looking like other people here and whatnot, right? So can you just begin by reflecting on what it's meant to you to have more than one home? Like if I ask Lalcha now, what is home? Maybe you should answer the question of what is home to you and how do you think of where you spend most of your life right now. And Padmini, we'll start with you and then go around. Hey, you have to unmute yourself, Padmini.
Yeah, hi. That's a very interesting question because for 16 years of my life, I grew up in this extremely small town called Digboy, which most people only know from their geography textbooks where oil is found. It's close to where the gas burning crisis is happening right now, which mainstream media is not covering. I spent 16 years there, then I spent 2 years in Guwahati, and then I spent 5 years in Bangalore, couple of months in Bhopal, and then I spent the rest of my time in Boston, right? So of all of these places, I think Digboy and Bangalore have been home to me more than anything else. Guwahati is still a city that I don't consider my own, despite it being the capital of my home state. So over time, the definition has changed because when I was younger, a lot of it was defined by the parameters of the tiny town I was living in. So that was all I knew. That was my whole world. And I had never conceptualized what it would have meant to be outside that space. So I don't know if I can speak to a general experience for Northeast students, but moving to Bangalore was extremely disorienting and a culture shock in many, many ways for me. Because coming from such a sheltered sort of small Assamese town environment to this sudden big city where everyone was very fluent and conversant and, hip in a certain way, and with it, it was difficult transitioning for me. I was very isolated at the beginning of my time in law school. The other thing I do want to flag is coming from Assam is within the Northeast a privilege of its own because it's one of the most dominant narratives you hear. Plus, I'm upper caste Brahmin, and that is a huge privilege in India that I can't ignore when I'm talking about my own identity. So in some ways, I've really had advantages that have allowed me to step outside and access resources and education and sort of occupy the spaces that I've come to occupy. In other ways, it's been a disadvantage, and I struggle to find people who are like me around me. For example, in my graduate school, I'm the only Assamese / person from the Northeast I know. And even at law school, you'll know this, Badri and Lalcha too, there were very few people from the Northeast that we had as role models or people we could look up to or just connect with. So that was extremely isolating. And there's also this big bucketing of the Northeast as one experience, whereas I don't think that's necessarily true as an identity construct. So, I mean, that's how my journey has been.
I'm finding this interesting, Padmini, also because it continues from the intersectional point you were making earlier. about how you associate with yourself in the many layers of your existence, right? And it's interesting, and we're going to come back to this because it's a favorite fact of mine, the fact that you were rank 1 in the national law admission test. So the reason why it's important is that most people that I know from the Northeast struggle academically, and it's because of language barriers, access to education. The circumstances are just very, very different in parts of India, which is different, right? And this is also true for several of our friends from South Asia, from Bhutan, Nepal, who land up in India. And for you, it must be so confusing because on one hand, there's the aspiration and like excellence associated with it. And as you said, like the Assamese mainland, we learned in the first hour, Rumal taught us how Assam really constituted all of the Northeast and then broke up into other parts. And there were some portions which had an independent identity in between as well. So the fact, it's such a mixed situation, right? You have privilege in some context, but not really in another context. Suddenly you take out the context. Now, when you go to the US, are you Indian first? Are you Assamese? Are you like Telugu? What does it mean really? So a nice way of highlighting that. Rumal, could you say something about this? Because I would love to hear how your different identities were operating, especially when you're thinking about home. You said Kotagiri is home, but
yeah. It's very interesting for me. So I was born in Manipur, and I was born in a small village called Saikot, which is very close to Choshanpur, which is not necessarily a Meitei-dominated area. But I was born in that place, and within, I think, 2 months of my birth, we moved down south. And once we moved down south, my whole childhood was this experience of being Tamil. I mean, actually not really of being Tamil, but being South Indian, right? And so I grew up largely in one of the most progressive parts of Tamil Nadu. I grew up in Kotagiri, which is within the Nilgiris, and I grew up in a public school. And a lot of my identity politics, a lot of my politics came from that growing up, because I grew up in a state that loved to be the rebel. I grew up in a state that hated Hindi. I grew up in a state that clearly was out there to make this whole definition of we are proud of who we are, blah, blah, blah. Like, for example, I are introduced in 400, but I would, because that's just how the district functioned, My Tamil teacher or my English teacher would ensure that we also read books from Tamil literature and to know about, Indian move, those kind of things. So a lot of my identity politics was about, we're in this big union where there is one majority community that's trying to, hush out everybody else. People, and we will childhood that I had, very rebellious in many. I'm very grateful for it.
Rumal, one sec. I think
as I 15, I started.
I think you were breaking up a little. I don't know if that was me or if it was.
Yeah, I can't hear Romal either, and I'm very intrigued.
You seem to be breaking up. I don't know.
Oh no.
This is like a pimple attack now, all of a sudden. But Romal, maybe we'll try again now. Maybe turn off the video, and could you just? I'll tell you. Yeah, I'll tell you what we caught so that you can probably take it on from there. You were talking about coming from a context which might have been in Manipur, but clearly you were in a liberal kind of setting, in a very public kind of setting, which wasn't, you said casteless earlier, but here it seems to be abstracted out of your primary identity as a Manipuri through your Tamil Nadu experience. So that's the part that we heard. And that's a part that I heard at least. Like, I'll leave it to you to take it from there.
Is my audio clear? Is my video clear? Or shall I switch the video?
Let's switch off the video for a bit. Your audio is a little glitchy.
Hello?
Yeah. Okay.
Audio is clear?
Great. Go for it.
Okay. So what I was saying, while I was born in Manipur, my childhood and a lot of my young experience, what kind of created who I was largely because I grew up in Tamil Nadu and in a place like Nilgiris, which is slightly different from the rest of Tamil Nadu because it's also isolated in its own way and doesn't have the kind of caste pressures that the rest of Tamil Nadu has, right? So I grew up in a very idealistic situation, reading a lot of Dravidian literature, reading a lot about Kamraj, reading a lot about Periyar. And this was not taught to me as politics, but it was taught to me as what culture was, right? So my footing was very sound, and it was this very strong footing of being proud of who you are, having a separate identity and being proud of that identity, be it linguistically, culturally, whatever. So when I was around 14 and 15, and I figured out I was in Puri. One of the good things that my father did was somewhere around that time, he figured out that his children were far too South Indian and not Northeastern enough. And so he sent us back to the Northeast. And I went back, and this time I was more in the urban center around Imphal. So I got to meet a lot of people who were Meitei, and also meet that side of my family. And I realized how different the experience of being an Indian in Ooty and being an Indian in Imphal was. It was, in Imphal, you're constantly reminded that you are not Indian, be it the army, be it the police force, be it anyone. They're constantly asking you, telling you that you look Chinese, you look this, you look that, you don't belong to mainstream India, you don't spend all these kind of things. Like, to kind of summarize, because I don't look very Manipuri, and I was much fatter before, and I often passed off as a Bengali person. I remember this one time where there were a bunch of Assam Rifle soldiers who were at a particular check post right next to the Manipur University. And they were being very threatening with the local people because there had just been a bomb blast and all kinds of things. And while anyone who looked slightly Oriental was stopped and checked, and I was on my evening walk, I wasn't stopped. And then they turned around to me and they immediately assumed I knew him. I did Hindi, I still do. And they just started off talking in Hindi, and the conversation went from how everyone there were basically dogs and deserved the kind of treatment that they were getting. And it got even worse. Like, there were a bunch of girls who were walking by, and these guys were catcalling those girls. And, they made a face and walked away. And this guy just looked at me and he said, no, they make that face, but they actually want us, because most of the people here, their penises are really small. And so these girls really want us because, we're Indian and we're huger and, stupid things like that, as small as that. So the racism boils down to small things like that, where they really completely dehumanize the local population and then also make them feel like they're not wanted in this country and all of those kind of things. So here I was someone who cried every time who heard Jana Gana Mana in a state where I was like, am I even Indian anymore because I'm Manipuri? Because the whole system is trying to tell me that I'm not. And everyone around me who's in power, be it the government or the army, is trying to tell me that I'm different and that I don't belong and that I'm not part of the mainstream Indian identity and that I speak this funny language and I look funny and I have small eyes. And, everything was working against me there. The only difference was I was not getting too much of it because I had passing capability. I passed off as a mainland Indian because my Hindi wasn't accented, right? And that woke me up because this boy who was brought up to believe in the idea of India, fervent nationalist, suddenly reached the other corner of this country and realized how that is the wrong way for me to be perceiving India. I suddenly realized, and I had to go back and understand what was India all about. Why did we form as a country? What was the need for all of these states to come together, these different principalities and kingdoms? Why did they accede into the country? Was it under force? All of these things became important to me. And slowly, as I understood what India was all about, it started angering me. It really made me angry that here are a bunch of people in this country, some of them forced to join the country, who are now being told that you are not part of this country and then are being punished for not feeling like they are part of the country. And then also being punished because there are now militant organizations in almost all the states that are trying to build an identity for them because of years and years and years of ignorance and discrimination. It was too much for me to deal with. Like, there was a point where I said, I'm not surprised that there are so many young militants in this state. Like, if I was born and brought up here, I mean, I was there, but I wasn't there. If I was brought up there, I think I would have joined militant organization because of just how much of the other system makes you feel. And I don't think, Padmini can add to this. I don't know if people in Assam go through the same thing, or I know Mizoram had a huge militant movement at one time that was quashed completely by the Indian government. Manipur, bits of Assam, like the and all of that. I get where they're coming from. I don't support them, but I get how this othering can often lead to people saying, so where do we stand? One side you're saying we're part of this country, the other side you're saying we're not good enough citizens, then you're saying that we don't look like the people of this country, then you make fun of us, our looks, our size, our hair, our skin, our languages, our food. Where does this community then stand? And it becomes much worse when they then come into mainland.
Yeah.
Considering one half, because I could speak Tamil and local languages and I didn't get much of it, but around me, irrespective of whether they were from East India or from Nepal or from Bhutan or from Sikkim, or even if they had slightly oriental features and from West Bengal or Bangladesh, people were being treated like shit.
Yeah.
And it just makes sense to me because I was like, these are people of our own country. So that's where the change happened. Someone who really believed in the idea of India that was being fed to me, to someone said, no, this is bullshit. The idea of India that was meant to be is what we need to be fighting for. So I think that's the journey that I've had so far.
That's a great place to pause. And it'd be nice if you could turn on your video for a bit again, if you don't have to speak. That's a good place to pause because it comes back to the passing privilege that Padmini was hinting at without speaking of explicitly, right? And I'm very curious to hear what Lalcha has to say about this because he doesn't have the same privilege in that context, right? In a certain way, Romal, you and Padmini can way through most of mainland India, or what we know of as the northeast of India, right? But Lalcha, how's it been like for you, man? I mean, you've grown up in Bangalore all your life. This is where you've been. What do you see, and how's it been? How do you think of home? Right now you're building a library back at home in Manipur, and you ran a very successful fundraising campaign to root that. But at the same time, you've grown up in Bangalore. You speak better Kannada than most people, including me, possibly because you can at least read and write and stuff. And you are more South Indian than a lot of people that I know. So, what's it been like for you?
Hey, I hope my video is clear. I'm in the middle of Bangalore and electricity is gone out, so I'm like trying to adjust myself to it. It's actually a very interesting observation that you made. So I'll try and address two things that you've said. One is where is home, and secondly that how coming from there to here. So I don't think you mentioned that some of us are privileged more than the other people to cross to the border, the region, and come to other cities. I don't think it's the same thing or situation in everybody's case. For example, in my case, it was not that I want to come to South India or go to a different city. It was out of compulsion, right? For example, what Romal has just ended with, the militancy issue between Nagas and Kukis in 1993 had a huge breakup. So my uncle was in Bangalore, actually. He was in Bangalore, he was in theology. He just graduated, tried to come back home. But then his village was entirely burned down. So he had no option to stay back. And then when he stayed back, he realizes that there were a lot of orphans and widows in Manipur because of the conflict. So he thought he'll just help some children and move some children from there to here. And I came to that way. So for us, it was out of necessity. It was not so much of like, because I have money, I'll go abroad and study. So, but it has in a way become beneficial for me in the long run. So again, regards to, growing up in two different places and where is home, this is also something that often, that I myself conflict with. I think Romal will have the same thing. Like I'm too South Indian from my Northeast friend. I'm too Northeastern from my South Indian friends, right? So I also live in that conflict. For example, when I came to Bangalore, I was staying in this hostel called St. John's, which is in Coats Park in the middle of Bangalore. And most of the hostel mates were Tamilians. And that's how my, South Indian culture upbringing happened. And I was just about 7.5. And I mean, like if you're coming here for studies, you at least know enough about yourself, your culture and history, right? I was just coming out of, a small village, and then I did not know any South Indian language, nor English, nor Hindi. So conversation, identity was a huge issue. I often ask myself about this, and also ask, why I'm being put up here. And that's how, and that sort of inquiry led me to discover myself, go back to my history, read about it, politics, Manipur constitution, history, all of that. And yeah, so one place, Manipur, actually I come from a very near place to where Romal was born, Saikot, in Simchur Champur. So yes, I was born there. So since you're born there, you're sort of, obviously your birthplace, your families are there, you feel connected to it. But even though I was born there, I feel like I'm nurtured in Bangalore. My friends, my education, my social life, everything is here. So this is not a question for me to decide Manipur is home, Bangalore. I think both are home in a sense. And I often have this analogy that I say to my friends, like, why do you call Bangalore a garden city? I said this, like, in a garden, you have to have different flowers. Otherwise, it doesn't look like a good garden, right? So I said, Bangalore, I felt so accepting to different cultures and identity. And I feel like I'm part of that one flower in this beautiful garden that we have. And if you look at even the LGBT community, Bangalore accepts that group so well, right? So I think Bangalore is very acceptable to outsiders. I have not experienced other cities as much, but I'm 100% sure it's much more friendlier than North Indians. So for me, both are home in a sense, because one is a place of birth, one is a place of upbringing. And I can't, as much as I can't deny where I'm from, I also can't deny the benefit or the upbringing that I've taken from Bangalore.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Man, that's both great points. I mean, Bangalore is the best city in the world, guys. We all know this. This is not a matter for democratic debate.
Yeah.
It's just a fact, And thanks for the acknowledgement. I can hear Romal nodding in the background, even if he's not saying it. But Lalcha, but Bangalore is a funny place because even within the place, we still have some aspects of xenophobia, right? So it's not, I mean, it may be better than other places in India, but the standard is so low that that really, like, even this might seem more pleasant than other places. But I like how you compared it with a garden, to say that there's diversity and there's richness, and that's what makes it interesting for you. And I also like the point that you made about having different kinds of home. Home doesn't have to be one thing. It's nice to have many homes, right? Like when someone says, I have a holiday home, you feel like it's a cool idea. And I mean, why should we have only one holiday home? We can have thousands of holiday homes. And in fact, I feel if you think of your friends who are like family, you feel like that's home too. You feel home around them, with them. So it's a nice way of characterizing it, Lalcha, because I feel like there's promise for more people to associate with that kind of imagination, And so Roman was making a point that he sort of directed towards Padmini, but Roman, I don't know how much of Lalcha you caught right now, but there was one very clear point that associated with you, which was about how he associates with you, saying, it often felt like he was too South Indian for Northeastern friends and too Northeastern for his South Indian friends, And he was also saying he's born near you and finds comfort in his Bangalorean home. So I'd love to hear you respond to that. But let me also ask you the next question that I think could make sense, right? So I remember the point you were making about like people turning to military action because it feels like you have no option at all. Like on one side, you're saying, what are you supposed to be? I can't imagine how frustrating it is for you guys. Like whatever you are, someone is going to abuse you in some form or the other. Say you're not enough of one thing or another. So can you please describe what for you would be an affirmation of your identity? What do you want to see in society which you think is an affirmation of your identity? And let's go beyond how we think about acceptance. And if you have ideas for how we can hang out to make this possible, please share them with me. For instance, an idea that, I mean, Roman, you're planning to launch a show. It would be great to hear some more about it. I've been thinking it would be nice to have cookouts based on different places, right? So we can understand these places better. We know another person through their food. We can have many kinds of ideas, like cultural immersion exercises. A very good friend of ours, Saurav Arya, runs a hostel, and he also does this with other countries. But imagine doing this with India. It would be so much fun. Would love to hear thoughts on both aspects. One, what affirmation would look like to you, and two, what kind of things can we do to get to know you better than we do right now. Roman, we'll try with your video again briefly. If it's too problematic, we'll just switch back to just audio.
No, the network is really bad. So I think if I put on my video, I'm just going to go off the call. I lost half his conversation already. So I'm just going to stick to audio so that at least I'm on the call. I mean, it's simple to ask me that question, but the answer is not complicated, but it's too much of an answer to have at this point. I mean, you say, what do I mean by what kind of affirmation would make me happy? The very fact that we need affirmation when we're Indian is something that really irritates me, right? Why have we reached the situation where a South Indian needs to explain to a North Indian that we only don't eat dosa idli at home, and that our languages don't sound like pots clanging, or that all of us are not dark? I mean, I don't give a shit whether they think we're dark or not, but why do we need to constantly have this conversation where we're affirming things about ourselves and we're saying this is who we are and this is what is this, blah blah blah? When it comes to language, we're constantly fighting them, saying that we don't want to speak Hindi. We're saying Tamil is older than Sanskrit. You can't be pushing these languages on us. The same thing when it comes to the Northeast, that it's not like this has not happened in the past. Even in a city like Bangalore, and when you kept saying Bangalore is the best city, I completely agree with you, because I've never really been in a city that has been so welcoming and so proactive in trying to make Northeastern people feel at home. Like for a long time, we had a cafe called Ants, which I don't know if it still exists. I think it does somewhere in Indiranagar.
The Ants has now been replaced. It's become, I don't remember what it's become, but it's not, Ants Cafe doesn't exist anymore, supporting... Yeah.
So before Ants started, the guys who started Ants were very close to a bunch of us in a similar circle. And I don't know if you were aware of it, but we did a whole bunch of food exhibitions before Ants started, where we had cookouts and we invited people to come and taste, different kind of Northeastern foods. And, we were reaching out to we were preaching to an audience that had already been converted. So it made no sense, because the people who came there already had a Northeastern connection. Either had a Northeastern best friend, or they were partly Northeastern themselves, or it was just really reaching out to people who didn't need that kind of information or that kind of, exposure. What really irritates me, and we don't see too much of this within the circles that we all hang out with, and that's because we're privileged and elite and all of that. But like, for example, how in a city like Bangalore, and I work very close with Northeast Solidarity, which is a group that helps Northeastern people in Bangalore that have problems, and these could be from legal problems to police problems to whatever. And often more than not, we think that this whole othering of the Northeastern only happens in the north. It only happens in Delhi and Gurgaon and blah blah blah. But it's equally happening in Bangalore. There are a lot of Northeastern people who are part of workforces who get beaten up on the regular. Recently, we had 3 trans girls from Manipur who were being abused by their neighbors. This was not even like a pimp or anything like that. Their neighbors were selling them out to other neighbors and had locked them up. Yeah, it was crazy. They had locked them up in their own house that they were renting. And, like, the shit was just basic stuff that you don't believe can happen in a city like Bangalore happens, right? Yeah. And all of this happens because there's an othering happening even in the South. It's happening also with the larger Kannada population. It's going hand in hand with the idea of who is Kannadiga, who is not Kannadiga. At one point in time, it was Kannada versus Tamil. Today, it's Kannada versus North. There's also Kannada versus Northeast. So whenever there was a problem in the Northeast, like, for example, I remember when I think a bunch of Rohingyas were attacked in Assam, and a lot of the local Muslims in Bangalore got angry with Northeasterners, saying, oh, you're attacking our people there, so we'll make your life miserable here. And in parts like Adugudi and Koramangala, it got so bad that I know at least 20-30 people who had to flee back to the Northeast. And then, they paint this one picture of Northeast. So the problem happened in Assam, but the boys being threatened and beaten up were from Mizoram and Nagaland. They had nothing to do with this whole thing. And they're like, we're Christian, we're not even Hindu. Like, what is happening? But that's how it is. No, there's this whole othering. So when you talk about affirmation, I could give you ideas and I could be like, yeah, this is what I mean by affirmation. But I'm like, I've reached a point where I'm like, why the should I get affirmation from you? I'm very much a part of this country, right? Like, I have equal right to be accepted. This face that you think is Chinese is not Chinese. It is Indian as you are. And when is that conversation going to happen? And when is that reality going to set in?
Well, have this conversation right now. So, like, all credit to you for at least initiating us in that direction. Were you about to say something else? I was about to pick up on that and then pass the baton.
Yeah, sure. You can go on to your next question.
No, not the next question. It's the same question because, like, man, there was such a good idea to say that affirmation is not something that needs to be condescended to someone. Like, who am I to like affirm you or anything? I should just not be in your way, right? And I should just come in the way of your self-expression and your self-identification with the Indian experience. And,
Badri, it's so annoying where Northeasterns are constantly judged and told, prove your Indianness. Can you sing the national anthem? Oh, you look so different. Look at the food you eat. Like, for example, one of the first questions that comes to me is when I tell people I'm from Manipur is, oh, so you eat dogs. And you're just like, one tribe eats dogs, and it's not like they eat it all the time. They eat it as a part of a special feast, and that's their food culture. Can you stop judging them based on what you think is food and what is not food? But the very fact that is what my identity is defined by. Oh, y'all make smelly food. Oh, y'all eat dogs. Oh, you eat everything that moves. Oh, y'all dress so funnily. Oh, all your women are always available. Oh, your men have small penises. All of y'all are effeminate. All of these weird ideas that come in these cultural contexts of what being a Northeastern is. It is really annoying. Sometimes it could be even something which they think is a praise. Like, for example, people will be like, oh, all of you can sing so well. And you're like, no, all of you are like this. There's this whole assumption that I know one Northeastern and therefore I know everyone else. And for me, it's doubling it irritates me doubly because I also see this as a part of the LGBTQ community, right? Like, they're like, my one gay friend likes to drag, so therefore you must want to drag too. And so for me, a lot of my identities are constantly stereotyped. And when it comes to the LGBTQ community, that identity, I have the patience to sit and explain it to someone. But when it comes to the Northeastern identity, I'm like, you educate yourself. You understand that you do not define Indian. Like, I have every right to call myself Indian as much as you do, right? And again, there's this whole, like, yesterday I was talking to the designer who's helping me with this whole series of conversations that I'm planning around the Northeast. And she said something very important. She said, can we please not make these conversations about hum bhi Indian hai? We are not. We don't need to make that conversation anymore. We are good as we are, and you need to accept it as this is also Indian.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's this whole apologetic thing where we're forced to feel ashamed of who we are. Like, for example, a lot of Manipuris who are part of the Vaishnavite culture, who are Vaishnavite and Hindu and Manipuri, will constantly tell you bullshit like, oh, but Chitrangada was one of our princesses and Arjuna came to Manipur and married her, and just randomly picking at things that will make us fit into this mainstream. Yeah. And it's reached that point where one bunch of us is angry and saying, can you just accept us for who we are? There's another bunch who's saying, we are part of you now. Why are you treating us different?
Hey, it's a weird situation. Let's just take we'll just shift it towards Padmini and Lalcha as well a little bit, Romal, because I just want to highlight two ideas there. The first one is affirmation as not something that needs to be condescended, as we said earlier. And the second one is that, like, well-intentioned acceptance can also come across in nasty ways. Like to say you all eat food. I mean, like, you all sing well sounds completely sweet and well-meaning, but actually it doesn't recognize that you're humans like everyone else. You have crappy people, colorful people, ignorant people. I'm sure that's normal, right? We all get up and take a dump. That's pretty normal. That's what it means to be human, for instance. And the other kind of identification that you pointed out was that tell us how you're Indian, why you're Indian, which is far more obviously xenophobic. And the third one is people making jokes without realizing the seriousness of the statements that you're making. Like to say you're eating dog food also as a joke, I don't think you should ever make jokes which put other people down, which are like cruel to other people. I've been guilty of it, especially in the context of, I think, like the sexuality and gender, at least. I mean, when I was younger, I didn't have the same sensitivity, or even like caste is the other thing which keeps coming up. And this goes back again to like Padmini's point on intersectionality. I mean, humor doesn't have to take on the forms of cruelty. And even if people think it's not really specifically targeting you, but making a funny joke about where you come from, they don't realize what they might be triggering in your experience. So I'm very sorry that you've had to face this, Roman, and to like all of you here, because yeah, this is not very human behavior, and it's not a nice way to be. Padmini, do you want to speak about this? Because I know you have a bunch of thoughts also on how do you think about extremism, because that's a expression of affirmation as well, right? Like to say that, what, screw you, I don't believe in the state, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm about. Yeah, we don't encourage it, we are completely against violence, but like the value of self-determination is everyone's right. This is what it means to be like Indian, right? You don't need someone else to tell you should be Indian in a certain way. So that was the point which Romal had tagged you on a little earlier. So if you want to speak about that and then speak a little more about affirmation, it would be great to hear that, Padmini.
Yeah, sure. I think Romal made a very valid point about how the Assamese experience of this sort of racism/xenophobia is a little bit different. The microaggressions that you're faced with are different. For instance, I think I've never really faced outright racist remarks. The most I've heard is, "Oh, you don't look like you're from the Northeast," and I always respond to that with, "What does someone from the Northeast look like?" And to speak about extremism and insurgency, the part of Assam I grew up in was extremely insurgent torn. We suffered quite heavily from blasts taking place all around us. A lot of my friends and family members died in these explosions, and our childhood was very uncertain. Till I turned 16, we never got to celebrate Independence Day, because anytime you wanted to hold a public function or a ceremony commemorating it, there were risks that the insurgents would sort of do something that would be harmful for the people around you. So we got a blanket off day, and it was declared as a buns. And the whole culture when I was growing up was around the idea of buns. So in that sense, I would say the extremism did take a toll on us as well in Assam. And while at the beginning, a lot of people understood where this frustration was coming from, because the Indian state just sort of reinforced the colonial policy of dealing with the Northeast, where you're in an extractive position and you take out all the resources that you can, while not giving them the benefits of development or fund allocation or paying attention much to how the region should have progressed. So a lot of people were very frustrated with that, and from that and the sense of this whole discourse around immigrants, which I think we should get into at a later point in this conversation, led to the rise of this insurgency and this extremism, right? So those concepts still remain very entrenched in the heart of the Assamese public, which is what I can speak to. I obviously can't speak to the Naga experience or the Manipuri experience. In terms of your question on assimilation, I think I'm astounded by the level of ignorance that most of the country continues to have about all the matters Northeast. While there has been better mainstreaming of people from the Northeast and sort of celebrities who have come up from the region, like Mary Com, for example, or I'm trying to think of other examples at this moment, but the names are slipping from my mind. So
hey, don't worry about the examples, Padmini, because the point is more important than the examples.
Yeah, so we've had some mainstreaming happen where people are like, "Oh, there are these people from this region who are important, like Hima Das or Mary Com, all these actors and stuff."
Baichung Chetri, you can name them as well.
Oh,
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure, Baichung, Sunil Chetri, all these people who've acquired some kind of mainstream spotlight. But overall, ignorance levels are extremely high. I've had people ask me questions like, whenever I show them Big Boy on the map, I've had several people ask me if that's even a part of India or whether it's a part of China. And I'm trying to think about ways to bridge this, right? Because on one hand, I strongly believe that the exhaustion of explaining things to your oppressor shouldn't be on you as a community. That's one. But on the other hand, I also occupy a space of privilege in this whole conversation. So to some extent, I should be open to the idea of sort of educating people to the extent that I'm capable of doing that. I think as long as there's willingness to learn and an open mind and an inherent curiosity that people need to have about this part of the country, the same kind of curiosity you have about celebrating other aspects of sorry, my dad in the background, about celebrating other aspects of Indian culture and identity. I think that curiosity is missing, and that's a problem, because this is not just about us, right? It's not just about how it benefits people from the Northeast region or people from Assam or people from Manipur. It's a bigger question of how that integration benefits the whole country, because there is a lot that the Northeast has to offer in general, and the rest, if you choose to sideline that, then you are just missing out on that opportunity.
Yeah, and would there be a reasonable break in that point? And yeah, this, I mean, like, I think you're just reinforcing what Roman has been telling us all along, right? Like, there's so much richness here. Please just come and experience it, because there's so much to learn from it. And I remember he was talking about three seasons of rice cultivation in some parts of Northeast, and the fertility is obviously insane, right? And I remember hearing about this movie which came out a couple of years ago. It featured the songs that rice cultivators would use while working on their lands. You know, it was so beautiful because it's such a nice way of getting to know the tribes and the connection to it. And I felt so disappointed at not having engaged more with the Northeast. And I still feel disappointed about it. Lalcha, what do you think about these themes? And it would be great to hear you begin from the mainstreaming point. Because in a certain way, you're also heavily mainstream, man. Like, you're now a hero figure for most of us here. And we look at you as someone who's, someone who's showing us a different way of being. We think of you as the exception, not the norm. And you are an exception, right? And you are not the norm. So what are your thoughts on this aspect of mainstreaming, and what kind of structures do you think we can build for better acknowledgement? Let me not say affirmation anymore. That's clearly a bad word, but acknowledgement seems more equitable. Yeah, Lalcha, you have to
I would respond to you in a very unstructured way. I'll start from where Padmini ends. There has to be a sort of tolerance first and curiosity, as you said. For example, why is it okay for you to call me a Nepali or a Chinese and not okay for me to call you Pakistani or a Sri Lankan, right? Because you look like a Pakistani, right? Same way. So my point being that, right, if you're ignorant, I have no issues with it. For example, we are blaming a lot of mainstream now because all of us right now are from Northeast. If you pick a few Biharis who are from Manipur, they'll blame all the Northeastern people, right? So it's a matter of place as well. My point is just, have that decency to ask. For example, when I sit in a cab, the person assumes, like, he starts speaking to me as, how is Nepal, how is China, what are you doing here, right? As a tourist, something. So for me, like, have a decency, first ask, sir, where are you from, right? And from there, we can begin the conversation. And we are as ignorant as a lot of South Indians are too about, the rest of, like I said, how would I distinguish between a Teluguite and Karnataka or Tamilian, right? So the only way to distinguish is to ask. So, and if you have to, the other way is like, in the long run, if you want to answer that, it's also the structure issue. For example, look at your textbooks. Your school textbooks has nothing about Northeast, right? So I remember when in 3rd, 4th standard, you used to draw something from one state, that you recognize. Karnataka, you will draw some dance, or from Kerala, you draw some, like, all of that you'll do. And Northeast, you just paint it green because there's this forest everywhere, right? So I think the ignorance begins from there. People who graduate MA, BA, can't still name 8 states of Northeast, right? It's very interesting. Padmini was speaking about the personalities from Northeast, because recently a localite from Bangalore just called me up and he said, I'm also a teacher and I want to educate my students about, Northeast, and what are the big personalities that you can tell me about. So I just told him, like, ask your student to be, I am a Northeastern person, but I'm curious about knowing your language, like Kannada, Tamil. I'm curious about your movies, right? I'm curious about cultures. They can have the same reaction towards that. I think that's the best way to go forward. We both learn from each other. Nobody loses in between. Both of us benefit in the long run.
Yeah, that's true. We all benefit from, like, illuminating ourselves and each other, right? And that's the beauty of enabling someone else, which is that you get to learn from their experience, and that's
Yeah.
really.
Also, I'll just before I forget, I just want to add one point that when you talk about history, the reason why you don't know about us is because you assume that we have no contributions to India in from history, right? I mean, one of the things, I don't know if this might sound funny also. I often say that Rabindranath Tagore, who wrote the national anthem, he could imagine Punjab, Sindh region sitting in Kolkata, but he couldn't imagine Northeast, just one state, two state, near West Bengal, right? Look at the national anthem. It mentions Punjab, Sindh, Vidya region, but have no mentions about Northeast. So what I'm trying to say is that even in the moral imagination of the founders of these big leaders, Northeast has never been a part of India. And for example, to stress that, for example, if you look at the World War II, just one historical context, right? When the entire mainstream politician, including Gandhi, was saying that we should fight for the British because they would give us freedom. And if I'm not wrong, in Hindu religion, it was prohibited to cross oceans to fight for war, right? In the religion belief. But they still broke that and fought for the British. Whereas if you look at in the Northeast, at the same time, most of the tribals in the Northeast were fighting with the INA under Subhash Chandra Bose. So if you're asking me, I'm nationalist. Like, look at this historical context and see who's a nationalist, who's anti-nationalist. There were a lot of tribals, Kukis, Nagas, fighting with Indian National Army, Subhash Chandra Bose, trying to get them from Burma to Imphal, because both Burma and Manipur was already occupied by the British, and so they were trying to find this hill tracks where they can secretly come inside Imphal. And the assumption that I often make about this, by the way, the Battle of Imphal and Kohima has been declared the biggest battle by the British Military Museum in the history of British. This is over Napoleon's battle with Napoleon. So even the Britishers recognize how important this is, right? But you don't even find this in Indian textbooks. So my theory is that, listen, if Subhash Chandra Bose would have won independence, it would have been totally a history. Northeast would have been recognized in a very proper and huge manner. In fact, in 2015, Modi recognized one of the INA pensioner who was a Naga. Nagas today are being blamed for and being anti-nationalists because they're asking for a different, referendum and all of that. So the point is, like, we're just so ignorant about the contributions that Northeast people make in the history of India, and it begins from there. It's all this racism here and there. It's, for me, it's a small thing, but the bigger structure begins from there. I think unless people are aware about all of this, they would always, like, if you want to recognize someone as Indian, you want to recognize why that person Indians, and why that would depend on what that person contribute towards being in India or being an Indian identity. And our contribution has now been recognized. Therefore, I think all this ignorance would still continue without this understanding these things.
Yeah, man, that is a great point. And Padmi, is this going to come to you? And I say it's a great point because this question of who is a nationalist, who is not a nationalist, especially given the contribution of the Northeast to Indian culture, is like it's huge. But Padmini, like you want to share a little story with us?
Yeah, I do. Lalcha made such an excellent point about the curriculum, and I was taken back to my class 12th days. And I had political science as a subject, and one of the questions, and the highest possible score that you had on a question was 6 marks. So it was really important to do well on the 6 markers, right? If you wanted to get some good marks there. And one of the 6 markers for my board exams set by the Central Board of Secondary Education for the whole country, one of the questions was, what were the causes and effects behind Indira Gandhi's emergency? What was the impact on the rising middle class? And how do you analyze the effect on the economy? It was this huge complex question. Or they had a map of the Northeast and they were like, name the 7 states. And those were like questions of equal complexity. And I was just like, wow, okay, thanks CBSE, 6 marks straight into my bag. And then when I came out, like, all of us were like, we are so sure there are people in the country who took that Indira Gandhi question several times over rather than identify the states of the Northeast.
Yeah. And, that's why Romal's first hour was truly amazingly educative for all of us, at least for me, personally speaking, because, Lalcha, you missed the point that he was making. He was talking about certain tribes in Manipur, Mizoram, having history from the 1st century AD onwards, like recorded history, local history from the 1st century AD onwards. That's unbelievable, man. That's like the most ancient thing we have known on the subcontinent, besides the Deccan Plateau, and that's a geological formation. So if you talk about human settlements and we talk about the Northeast, and if it is a part of our country, it's a shame that we don't talk about its history. And I asked a question to Romal when you were not here about Sikkim, and he said, we don't have the history. And for me, that it's a bizarre idea to think that you don't have history, right? Like, if it hasn't been put in a book, if you haven't spoken of it authoritatively, is it even history? And it raises that question, which is, we take so much of our, like, the ease of our day-to-day existence and our identity for granted, but that's because knowledge has reinforced it over and over again, right? Like, I know where I come from, I know where my grandfather comes from. Having grown up in my own context, I know, like, lots of details which I am ashamed of knowing right now, And in a certain way, if you take away people's language and history, then you can't imagine flourishing. You can't imagine.
Yeah. So just to add your point, if you take away my history, in a sense, I don't exist, because in my history is my story, and you've taken that away from me. So I may be physically present, but I'm not as an identity present. So just to add to what I was saying earlier, if you go to Moirang, which is a district between Imphal and my home state, Churachandpur, there's a museum about the INA, Subhash Chandra Bose, and the Kukis, my tribes, who were involved, as well as Nagas. And there were local songs about, Subhash Chandra Bose and an INA and the way they fought. And nobody gives a damn about Nehru or Gandhi, because Nehru or Gandhi was not present in Northeast. For us, now if you talk about Subhash Chandra Bose, BJP and Congress are fighting right and left. But, when in fact tribals were dying, standing in the front line, dying for him, right? And now there's appropriations of his identity itself. So I think these things have to be discussed.
Yeah, it has to be. So Padmini might have to bounce. Okay, it looks like she might be able to stay. So we'll see how it goes. Lalcha, that point about Tagore and now about INC, man, you're just making the same point over and over. We don't see who's next to us and we see everyone else. I see you and I see a Chinese person. I'm not able to see your humanity. What a pity we live in. But okay, so can we talk about, I would love to hear your thoughts. I know we have only 20 minutes and this is a huge...
Badri, I just want to come in just for a second.
Yeah. Romal, can I make this point and then you come in and then also answer this. So just in the interest of time, right? I want to raise one issue which we have spoken about, but we haven't delved into, but like we haven't explored in greater detail in our conversation. And we can't really, right? But I'm just going to leave it there so that we can examine it a little more carefully. This othering. So othering within yourselves, think about the service staff, not people who are educated or have the same kind of privilege that you do. Can you speak, I'm not saying speak of their experience authoritatively, but what are your thoughts on your brothers and sisters who haven't been as fortunate as you have? I'd love to hear. I mean, we have only 15 minutes left, so I guess we have to be as synoptic as we can. We'll come back to this theme. This is the first time we're speaking about the Northeast. I mean, looks like we can have, we know we can have 100 episodes, and that's why you're launching your channel now, Romal. So perhaps a thought on that, and also feel free to respond to anything that came before you. So Romal, we'll start with you. Then Padmini.
No, I just wanted to
go for it.
Just wanted to get in a point which I think is very, very important. We talk so much about Indian nationalism, the Indian country, Indian patriotism, blah, blah, blah. As he was talking about Moirang and all of that, and the INA and Subhash Chandra Bose's army, the first Indian flag to have been hoisted on Indian soil, if we consider the Northeast to be part of India, was in Manipur. And that's something that very few people know. And we're so patriotic about this whole thing about, the Indian flag and the Indian identity. The identity began there, and we're still treating the people of that place as outsiders. So just quickly going from there, segueing into your question, I really can't talk about all of these different people because I haven't had their experiences. But what I can talk about is how when one person oppresses one person, one community oppresses one community, sometimes sadly people learn to oppress communities below them, and one of the reasons why I want to have these conversations going on and get these conversations out there is because of the kind of racism. I mean, my colleague actually brought it up. Mr. Hakup actually spoke about it just now, that there is also racism within each of these states, something that we don't really talk about. Like the way India treats Manipur, Meiteis treat the other people in the state. So, like for example, today when someone asks you Mary Kom, right? Let me ask you this question, Badri. What do you think Mary Kom is? Like, if I asked you what is Mary Kom's identity, what would you say?
I have no idea. I mean, what am I supposed to say?
Okay, at least where do you think she's from? Where do you think she's from?
She might be from Manipur, but I feel
Correct.
like
Now that's the thing. So everyone would call Mary Kom Manipuri, right? And Manipuri is a very weird term because we don't really know who you're referring to, right? But a lot of the Meiteis, who are the dominant community in Manipur, would talk about Mary Kom like she's one of them. When actually Mary Kom, her name itself says that she comes from the Kom tribe. But how many people know about the Kom tribe? In Manipur itself, how many people are willing to talk about the Kom tribe, right? Because she's done something amazing. So now there's this whole need to pull in her achievements into your community and talk about like she's part of but in reality, the Kom tribe is one of the tribes that's been ignored by the Manipur government for years and years and years and years. But then now that you have this one woman who's doing international work there, now suddenly she's part of everyone's, and she's on everyone's lips. But nobody's talking about what's happening to the Kom community, right? And it's important for us to start talking about the Northeast so that I can eventually at some point start talking about this. Because we're such a culturally diverse place. There are so many hierarchies that form within each of these states. And it's important to break these hierarchies before they become too much. Manipur as a state is on the verge of exploding because we've got the Nagas, we've got the Kuki-Chin tribes, and we've got the Meiteis in between. And there have been armed resistance between each of these groups forever. It's either the Nagas versus the Kukis, or the Kukis versus the Meiteis, or the Meiteis versus this one. And we're constantly in a state of, where we're not able to manage peace. I think the last 5 years have been the most peaceful in the state of Manipur ever since independence happened, But it's important for us to talk about these things because only then can we then talk about communities that are not getting what they should. Like when you're talking about people, people who don't have privilege like me, I can't even talk about them because where do I have the energy to work for these communities when we're constantly in a state of war? Everything else becomes more, keeping peace becomes more priority. Everything else takes precedence. And so it's important for us to reach a point where these communities and these states can actually exist and exist in harmony so that we can actually look at these communities that are not getting what they deserve to get. We can look at these communities that are being marginalized within these states. Right now, nobody's even talking about those things because there are too many other problems, right? Like, for example, there's a Muslim minority that lives within Manipur. How many people even know about that? They're called Pangals. They have a huge history. But they're again mistreated by the Hindus, who are the majority in the state. They're being mistreated by Christians, who are also the second majority in the state. So there are so many of these narratives that need to come out, but the only way they can come out is when we reach that point where people know what's happening there, right? See, like for example, when COVID started, to just give you a situation, after the COVID lockdown happened, there have been 3 earthquakes in Manipur, right? You heard about the oil gas fire well in Assam, at least that got some coverage, thank you. There were 2 nature reserves in Assam that are highly under threat right now, that nobody is even talking about, right? There have been ethnic clashes in Meghalaya. Nobody's talking about that. So till we start focusing on these things, I don't know what's the point in having these conversations because the macro issues itself are not being dealt with. So where is there space for us to go into small communities that are economically being marginalized or communities that are being ignored, all of that? It's only going to happen when we start focusing on the Northeast as an important part of the country. Yeah. I think Padmini had something to say.
Yeah. Padmini, she's been telling me a lot about, Padmini, why don't you speak about it? This is, I know how close it is to your heart. So maybe you can go next and then we'll go to Lalcha.
Sorry, about what?
No, about the kind of conflicts in the Northeast right now, not just the dramatic and very serious environmental disaster. I don't know what's the equivalent of a genocide in an environmental context. That's what we're seeing in Assam right now, right? And destroying biodiversity without thinking twice about it. what a situation to be in. But like, if you want to reflect on Romal's point and also add your thoughts on your brothers and sisters who are less fortunate, and I say yours because I mean, I suppose more your brothers and my cousins. But what are your thoughts, Padmini?
Yeah, I agree with Romal's point in the sense when the Kerala floods happened and they were terrible and obviously a big tragedy. They got so much coverage and when the Chennai floods happened, there was so much work done for aid relief and stuff. And then I thought like every year there are devastating floods that happen, especially in the lower part of Assam. And that just doesn't get as much attention or national focus. And that's a problem because these things are happening, like environmental disasters, natural disasters and man-made crises are happening in the Northeast like on a regular basis. And these things don't get covered unless there's some major blast or like a lot of people die. And that kind of spectacle shouldn't be necessary for us to be of the same importance as the other states in the country, right? And if we're speaking about issues, then the fallout of the NRC is looming upon us, and that is something that my state has uniquely gone through. And the crisis of statelessness that is going to explode from this document being created, and the fact that so many people who are already being deprived of their citizenship through the foreigners tribunals that exist. And now we've created this document effectively saying, okay, these people are citizens and these people are not citizens. The fallout from that is going to be catastrophic. And like, I just want everybody to keep their ears on the ground because the government seems to be using the pandemic as a time period to slide in all kinds of questionable policies and questionable political decisions. So this is going to happen very soon. And this is of huge concern to me as somebody working on these issues. And I honestly think that the time has come where these issues become not just regional issues, but national issues as well. Can you imagine if there was an equivalent citizenship deprivation process going on for 1.9 million people anywhere else in the country? Like we would not hear enough of it. And I think this is a concern. Yeah.
I mean, it is a concern is the most understated and most diplomatic way of saying what a. I mean, I don't know. Do we censor ourselves on this show? I guess we'll find out. But in any case, it's the worst thing that we could do right now. And the inhumaneness about this, like we think of citizenship as a vast swath of a percentage of something. You don't realize that there's a human behind every passport or every citizenship document. And you're talking about people who've just had no connection with the state, right? Like, how do you expect to have these documents which are supposed to validate your existence and your reality? I mean, it's so dehumanizing, right? And Padmini, the larger point here really is, I suppose what you do when nobody's looking reflects your priorities, right? And that way, this current predisposition has been so embarrassing. Like, it's been so embarrassing, like to be thinking of this as the time to be quashing protests, slipping in other changes. Man, we have a pandemic to take care of, and we're really like very, very screwed. Just speaking of the pandemic, right? And India is one of those places which is mirroring, I mean, doing, I would say, over time far worse than the US in managing it, because our health infrastructure is so broken. Like US might be morally or ethically corrupted, beside, even if they don't have infrastructural issues, but like India doesn't have either, and the rate of the spread is insane. And Padmini, you and I spoke on an earlier episode about how easily it could spread through your village if it were to enter there. Nothing you can do about it. No way ventilators are going to reach you. I'm sorry, but that's like a death sentence, right? And New Zealand is panicking over 2 new cases after 34 days, So in the midst of all this, to be passing off environmental clearances, to be reinforcing the whatever their conception of justice of the CAA and NRC is, this is bizarre and unacceptable, right? Like, and tools like the UAPA coming down on journalists. I mean, this is, I feel like the constitutional prerogative has been on insisting on our unfreedom as opposed to our freedom. What an embarrassment, But in any case, like Lalcha, man, at least like rescue us, speak more hopefully than we can, unfortunately, at this moment. And I suppose it's really for us as citizens to be participating through our actions, right? And that means having opinions on it, and to be able to live that way, share that way, be kinder and stuff like that. Lalcha, what do you think?
You're talking about my brothers and sisters who can't speak up for themselves as much as I do, right? Yeah, I mean, just yesterday, I was having a conversation with my cousin who works in a beauty parlor, and right now I mean, 90% of them are from Northeast, and the owner have said they take 50% or leave. Now, if you're earning 20,000 per month and you're going to take 10,000 now, and your rent is about 5-6,000, and you have a brother or sister living whom you have to feed, like you can't really survive 10,000 in Bangalore at this point of time, right? Because on average there are 3-4 families. So yeah, if something happened for me or against me, I mean, I have the social capital, I have connections. I could call a few alumni to help me. But a lot of these people, like who works in restaurants, bars, and parlors, are having a huge problem right now, and they're not getting paid on time. There was a friend who called me up yesterday who already left to Manipur, who wasn't paid for a month before she left. Right? This problem is continuous problem because they realize that we don't have both the social and political capital to do anything about it. We go to the police stations, they may take the case for the sake of it, but we don't have the time and energy to keep going, right? Because these people have to go work daily, and most of us are students, and we don't have any means to put pressure. And most of them leave their job for like after working 2 months, they don't get paid, they leave. And this is a problem that happens in every service industry. So if you're asking me how they're facing, how they're dealing with right now, I can only say they're suffering because there is no way we can sort of help them. There may be 1 or 2 lawyers who might be friendly towards us who will take up cases. For example, someone like someone from ALS would take up few cases from Northeast if they are okay about it. But other than that, a lot of them are suffering. I mean, I have no way to express that because I haven't experienced it, but it's happening all around, and we have to tolerate that suppression and keep working. I don't think there's any other way to that.
Yeah, I mean, keep working, but what does that even mean? Like this, for instance, for me, it's confusing to think that this is a cousin of yours, man. Like it's still, I keep forgetting, Lalcha, that you are very extraordinary. Your family doesn't come from the same kind, doesn't have the same kind of capital in any way whatsoever. For you to think about doing the kind of things that you do, you're very uniquely positioned to be able to do them, right? Most people in your immediate surroundings don't have them. So thanks for reminding us of that. And I suppose it's confusing because very easily it's now what is the salon owner supposed to do? And ultimately it should fall on the state, right? To think about how you can care for the who are within our remit. And we've known forever, I think, like our constitution's makers noticed the need for social security as something which is concomitant with freedom and liberty, right? Like you can't be, it's very difficult to be free if you don't have the capacity to be fed and like healthy and whatnot. So okay, we are near the end of this exercise. Can I invite you all to like show yourself on screen? I'll leave you to say whatever you want to say to our viewers, your hopes, fears, aspirations, words of love. Why don't you encourage people to subscribe to our channel and donate to these causes so that we can watch each other's backs, And the point of this is really to notice the strangers who make our lives possible. So whatever you'd like to say, guys, reflect on it. We'll go backwards now. Lalcha, Padmini. Padmini, you're the one who's running out of time, right? So Padmini, you go first, then Lalcha and Romal, and we can say bye.
Thanks, Badri. I think the only thing I have to say is please educate yourselves. If someone like me from Digboy can make the effort to educate myself on the rest of the country and the rest of the world, then definitely everyone can take on that mantle of educating themselves. I don't even know everything about my own state's history, but there's a certain amount of grace in admitting to that, I think, and to saying that we should all just be doing the best that we can to keep learning. So ignorance is not always an excuse in these matters. So I think the best we can all do is to just keep learning and reading. And if anyone wants resources, I'm happy to share my folder of readings and literature and stuff like that. You can reach out to me.
Yeah. So Padmini, please share all your literature with us and we'll pass it along. Shit, I didn't mean to sound damn shady when I said like literature readings, but in any case, Lalcha, what about you? You want to say something and then say bye, and then Romal?
Same thing, yeah. Just be curious about other person identity, learn his language. You'll find some common interests you can bond on, right? I speak Tamil, I speak Kannada. Sometimes I get a free ride auto because I speak Tamil, right? It's simple as that. Then language is a huge barrier when it's like a doors to other people's life and history. So I mean, just whether you're a Northeastern person in South India or a South Indian person with Northeastern people, find that common friend where you can talk with, have it, break those barriers. It just, and in the process, in the long run, and you benefit both ways. You know something new, they know something new, and in that friendship itself, tolerance, everything comes in.
Yeah,
Rather than rejecting the person. Yeah.
that's true. I mean, curiosity is so easy. Anyone can be curious about anything, right? And there's no reason not to be. Romal, your turn. Please tell people to what your thing is going to be called. How do we tune in? Please come back here. If you get too famous, that'll be very unfortunate. When we have first dibs on your alternate media appearances.
Yes, we're starting a series most probably this weekend or next. I don't think this weekend is going to work. So next weekend. And we've lined up a lot of huge influential people from across the Northeast who will be talking about their own cultures. So it's largely going to be people talking about their own experiences, their lives, and as real as these accounts can get, right? So that's the whole idea. Because as we're constantly telling people, inform yourself. But I've realized this generation likes to be spoon-fed, and they like to be given information on a platter. So I'm not even giving them that excuse. I'm going to give you the information on a platter. Now it's about time you lap it up. Like, I'm not even asking you to go to Google. I'm not asking you to go to Wikipedia. I'm saying just listen to these conversations and you will be educated as much as you need to be. My only piece of advice to anyone who identifies as the mainstream is please unlearn. Please stop putting yourself in as the crux of the universe or the crux of a culture or as the center of an identity, because we've been taught by the powers that be in India that there's a certain idea of what being Indian is. And the only way we can solve this big problem that we have, be it, the North Indian versus South Indian, the North Indian versus the Kashmiri, it seems to be like a problem with the North in general, North Indian versus the Northeast Indian or the South Indian versus. The only way is to unlearn and to stop putting ourselves in the center of what this Indian identity is, and to understand that it's not a single identity, but this complex, beautiful, diverse identity that has so many facets to it. And I think if we can do that personally, we'll be open to learning all of these cultures and understanding them, and we'll just make sounds very idealistic today, but we could dream of an India tomorrow that is an India that was actually meant to be. Because right now it's just, we made a mess of this country for the last several years. So it's time we kind of started the problem.
Yeah, I really feel like we are nationalists at heart. We love this country. We want, but I hope the imagination of it can be fairer and nicer and all of that, and thanks for ending with almost that prayer and sort of a blessing, Romal, because the blessing of knowledge and the prayer of reimagination. So I think that's a good note for us to end this conversation. It's been so lovely to have you here. Padmini had to say bye and run off in between. She says bye to you guys as well. And let's chat again. It was so nice of you, both of you and Padmini, to join and educate us as like generously and also as patiently as you have, because I think the gap of ignorance is far further than we can even acknowledge in a conversation like this. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
We'll see you next on Sunday. Bye.
Bye.